My name's Alana, and I'm 21 years old. I live in a small town just outside of Savannah, Georgia. Growing up, things were pretty normal for me. My parents were kind, my neighborhood was quiet, and I had everything I needed. But in high school, I kind of lost my way. I was all about partying, drinking, and showing off. I thought being popular was the most important thing in the world. Then, when I was 20, everything changed. One night, I almost died from alcohol poisoning. I was lying on a dirty floor at some party, barely conscious. There were people all around. Me. People I thought were my friends. But no one helped. Not a single person called for help or even asked if I was okay. That night made me see things differently. I knew I had to change. And I did. But there are still things I regret. There's one memory I think about more than any other. It was near the end of senior year. My friends and I were in chemistry class, laughing and messing around like always. That's when we noticed Jamal. He was one of those kids who mostly kept to himself. He didn't have many friends. His clothes were always kind of old-fashioned, and his hair looked like it hadn't been cut in a while. He wasn't a bad guy, just quiet and awkward. But back then, that was enough for us to make fun of him. I hate admitting it, but we teased him all the time. One day, while we were talking about a party coming up that weekend, Jamal must have overheard us. After class, he came up to me and asked if I needed someone to go with. I still remember the way he looked when he said it, nervous like he knew I'd laugh. But instead, I said yes. I told him I needed a date so people would think I had a boyfriend. He smiled so big, like I'd just made his whole week. We exchanged numbers and he said he'd pick me up Friday night. What he didn't know was that it was all a joke. My friends had this mean plan. They bought 2 huge tubs of mayonnaise and said we were going to dump them on Jamal at the party. My job was to get him in the perfect spot by pretending we were taking a picture together. I told Jamal it was a fancy party and that everyone had to dress up. He said he'd go buy a tuxedo. I actually encouraged him. That's how cruel I was. Friday night came, and it was pouring outside. Thunder was rumbling in the distance, and the rain was beating hard against the windows. I'll never forget the moment Jamal pulled up in his mom's car, dressed in a full tux and holding a little bouquet of flowers. He even got out in the rain to open the car door for me. That's when the guilt really hit me. He looked so hopeful, so proud to be my date. Part of me wanted to tell him everything and just go back inside, but I didn't. I was scared my friends would get mad. At the party, my friends were already hiding with the mayonnaise, waiting for my signal. I was supposed to walk Jamal over to this one spot and pretend we were posing for a photo. Then I'd say I had to use the bathroom and they'd dump the stuff on him. When the moment came, I looked at him and said, "Hang on, I'll be right back." I walked off, but I didn't go back. I actually hid in the real bathroom because I couldn't stand to watch. A few minutes later, I heard someone say Jamal had started crying and left. He just turned around, soaking wet from the rain and mayonnaise, and drove home. I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. The next week, Jamal tried talking to me again. He acted like nothing weird had happened. He even asked where I went that night. That made me feel worse than anything. He didn't even realize I was part of the prank. I wanted to disappear. I stopped replying to his texts and ignored him in class. Luckily, we only had chemistry every other day, and there were only a few weeks left until graduation. But even after school ended, he didn't stop. He found me on social media and kept sending messages. Somehow, don't ask me how, he even got my new phone number. He never sent anything threatening, just little check-ins, compliments, and "how are you" messages. But it went on for years, 6 years to be exact. Now I work the night shift at a gas station outside of town. It's the kind of place that's quiet most nights, except for the occasional trucker or traveler passing through. Most people fill up and leave within 5 minutes. But not Jamal. Around 3 a.m. on rainy nights, he sometimes shows up. The first time, he acted surprised. "Oh, hey, I didn't know you worked here," he said, like he'd just stumbled in by accident. He bought one plain candy bar, a Hershey's, and stood at the counter talking to me for way too long. I thought it was just a weird fluke. But then he came back. The second time, he said, "I drove all the way here because these candy bars are the best." Same candy bar, same awkward smile, same 3 a.m. in the middle of a storm. But the third time, that's when I really started to worry. He looked different, rougher. His hair was a mess and his clothes were dirty like he'd been working outside all day. He came in, bought the same chocolate bar, and didn't leave. He just stood there. I handed him his change and said, "Have a good night." But he didn't move. He stood right at the counter, staring at me without blinking. The store was completely silent except for the rain tapping against the roof. The lights flickered a little, and I felt this deep, creepy chill in my stomach. "Do you need anything else?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He shook his head but still didn't leave. Then, without saying a word, he reached over the counter and tried to hold my hand. I yanked it back fast and told him he needed to go. That's when he said something I'll never forget. "Why are you like this?" "I love chasing you. One day you'll stop running." That's when I snapped. I told him everything. That the night of the party was a setup, that I was part of the joke, that I never liked him, not even a little. I told him I would never date him, and I wished I'd never even spoken to him in high school. His smile disappeared. His face twisted into something angry and ugly. He knocked over a display of gum and then started walking toward the door. But just before leaving, he turned back, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "I'll have you one day, little pretty princess." Then he walked out into the rain. I didn't know what to do. I stood behind the counter shaking. Legally, he hasn't done much. Nothing the police would probably take seriously. But emotionally, it's terrifying. The way he looks at me, the way he shows up at night, always during storms, it's not normal. If he comes back again, I'm calling the cops. The worst part is that I don't even recognize the girl I used to be. I don't care about being popular anymore. I don't want to be mean or make fun of anyone ever again. I just want a fresh start, a quiet life, and maybe one day, someone kind to love me for real. But for now, I'm stuck with this shadow from my past. A guy I hurt, yes, but who turned into someone I no longer recognize. And maybe this is what I get. Maybe this is some twisted way the universe pays you back. But I've learned one thing for sure. You can try to bury your past, but sometimes it shows up in the rain with a candy bar and a stare that chills you to the bone. Before we jump into the next story, I'd really love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I read each one and it honestly makes my day. Also, I'm still new to all this and just starting to grow this channel. So if you're enjoying the stories, consider subscribing and turning on the bell. It would mean the world to me. This all happened a few years ago, after I left my home in Jamaica to start over in California. I didn't leave because I wanted some big adventure or to chase a dream. I left because I had to. I had just gotten out of a long, abusive relationship. My ex-girlfriend didn't just hurt me emotionally, she controlled everything I did. Where I went, who I talked to, what I wore. Even after I broke up with her, she kept popping up in my life like she couldn't let go. Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done. My family meant everything to me, and walking away from them broke my heart. But I knew I needed to get far away, somewhere new, somewhere where she couldn't find me. So I picked California. The weather was better. There were more people, more opportunities. And something about the place just felt like a fresh start. I've always loved photography. Faces, street scenes, even just quiet little moments, something about freezing time in a picture always gave me peace. I figured California was full of interesting people and places, so I might as well go where the action was. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and flew to Los Angeles. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have a job or a place to live. Just a couple $100 and a camera. At first, I stayed in a cheap motel in Koreatown. It was nothing fancy, just a bed, a bathroom, and a flickering light that buzzed all night. But it gave me somewhere to sleep while I searched for work and a place to live. I spent every day walking around, soaked in sweat or sometimes rain, showing my portfolio to small studios and magazines. After about a week, I got a break. A tiny, online magazine needed a part-time photo assistant. It wasn't much money, but it was enough to survive. I also found a small studio apartment near Melrose Avenue. It wasn't the best part of town, but it was close to everything. And since I didn't have a car, I walked everywhere. It felt good to finally unpack my bags and settle into something that felt like home. Things started looking up. I made a couple of friends at the magazine. I even started dating again, a sweet, funny woman named Jordan who worked at a nearby bookstore. Life didn't feel perfect, but it felt calm, like I could finally breathe. But then came that night. It had been raining nonstop all day. Heavy, hard rain that pounded the streets and flooded the sidewalks. I stayed late at work to help with some last-minute edits, and by the time I left, it was close to 1 a.m. The city looked like something out of a horror movie. The streetlights flickered, water rushed along the gutters, and the sound of thunder echoed over the buildings. Most of my walk home was along well-lit streets, but the last stretch, the one where my apartment was different. My building sat at the end of a narrow road lined with big old trees. It was dark, quiet, and soaked in shadows. There were no streetlights, just the sound of rain hitting the pavement. I turned onto the street and kept my head down, pulling my hood tighter around my face. That's when I saw him. A tall, heavy-set woman stood at the bus stop near the corner. She had on a huge coat, and even though the rain was coming down hard, she wasn't moving, just standing there like she was waiting or watching. I tried not to stare, but we locked eyes for a second, and something about the way she looked at me made my skin crawl. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't even anger. It was cold, like she already knew what was about to happen. I looked away quickly and picked up my pace. I didn't want trouble. I didn't want conversation. I just wanted to get home. But every step I took made my stomach twist tighter. I could feel her watching me. I could feel her eyes burning into my back. I didn't dare turn around. I'm not a small guy. I'm about 5'10", pretty lean but strong. I work out and take care of myself. Still, something told me I wouldn't stand a chance if she decided to come after me. The street felt darker than usual. The trees above blocked what little light the sky had left, and the rain was so loud I couldn't hear anything else. My heart started racing. I slid my hand into my coat pocket and grabbed my keys, pushing them between my fingers like I'd seen in self-defense videos. That's when I heard it. Fast, heavy footsteps splashing through the water behind me. I spun around just in time to see her running straight at me. I yelled, just screamed out of pure panic, and she grabbed the front of my jacket with both hands. Her grip was like iron. My body reacted before my brain did. I punched her in the face with the keys still in my hand as hard as I could. She stumbled back for a second, but not enough. I thought she was about to come at me again when suddenly, a car turned onto the street, its headlights shining right on us. The driver honked the horn and flashed the lights. That was enough. She backed off and ran down an alley without looking back. The car pulled up beside me. I flinched, still shaking, soaked in rain and fear. The window rolled down, and a young woman leaned out. She looked familiar. "I know you," she said. "You work at that magazine, right?" I nodded, too scared to speak. "I've seen you taking pictures around here. Get in." That lady just ran into the alley. I think she had someone else waiting there. I hesitated, but she held up her driver's license and her work badge from a nearby cafe. "Please," she said, "just get in. I don't want them coming back." I slid into the passenger seat, still gripping my keys like a weapon. My hands were shaking. My chest hurt from how hard my heart was pounding. As she drove me the rest of the way, I stared out the window, watching the rain beat against the glass. My mind kept playing the whole thing over and over. What if the car hadn't shown up? What if there really was someone else waiting in that alley? I don't know what her plan was or why she targeted me. But I know this. Something bad was going to happen if that stranger hadn't come along. That night changed everything for me. Now I always trust that little voice in my head. The one that says something's not right, because it was screaming that night and I'm so glad I listened. I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps rushing up behind me. Never forget how cold that woman's stare was. And I pray I never feel that kind of fear again. Stay safe. Stay alert, and if something feels off, don't wait. Trust your gut and get out of there. When I was in my 20s, I worked at a small grocery store in Riverside, California. It wasn't a fancy job or anything, but it paid the bills. Sometimes, to make extra money, I'd do deliveries in the evening. The store had this little side service where people could call in and have groceries dropped off if they were sick, older, or just didn't want to leave the house. Most of the time, these drop-offs were boring. Same neighborhoods, same roads, same front porches with motion, lights that clicked on when you got close. But one night, I got a delivery I'll never forget. It was late, around 8:45 p.m. A storm had been brewing all day, and by the time the order came in, the sky was pitch black and the thunder was rolling in hard. Rain hadn't started yet, but you could feel it coming in the air, thick, heavy, like the sky was about to burst open. I was finishing up my shift when my manager, Maria, handed me a paper bag and said, "Last one. Can you take it?" It's a bit far out, but the guy said he tipped good. I looked at the address. It wasn't in town, more like 20 minutes outside the city, heading toward the hills. I didn't think much of it at the time, just figured it was someone who lived a little off the grid. Happens around here. So I grabbed the order, tossed on my hoodie, and hopped into my old beat-up Honda. Thunder cracked loud above me as I started driving. I kept my music low and my eyes on the road, watching lightning flash in the distance. It was one of those nights where you don't want to be out unless you have to be. The directions took me onto a narrow road that ran through a thick patch of woods. It wasn't one of those major highways with signs and traffic. It was more like an old back road with no streetlights and only enough space for one car to pass at a time. I'd been down roads like that before, but never this far out. After about 15 minutes, my GPS dinged and said, "You've arrived." But there was no house, no mailbox, no lights, just trees. I pulled over to the side of the road and double-checked the address on my phone. Same thing. Google Maps and Apple Maps both dropped me off at the same exact spot. According to both, the house was supposed to be right here, but all I could see was darkness. I rolled down the window, hoping maybe I'd hear something. Dogs, barking, someone calling out, but all I heard was the wind picking up through the trees and the soft rumble of thunder getting closer. That's when I decided to call the customer. The phone rang twice before a man picked up. "Hey," I said. "I'm outside, but I don't see a house. Are you sure this is the right address?" There was a short pause, and then he said, "Yeah, you're in the right place. The driveway's just hard to see in the dark. It's real narrow. You'll probably have to get out and take a look. It goes into the woods." I looked out again. Still just trees and mud and shadows, no driveway, no sign of anything man-made. "I don't know," I told him. "I'm not seeing anything." He paused again, then said, "It's there. You just have to look closer." Then he hung up. No goodbye. No thanks. Just click. Right then, lightning lit up the sky, and for a second I saw something deep between the trees, a dim, flickering light, like someone holding a flashlight far off in the distance. It disappeared just as fast as it showed up. Something about that gave me chills. I got out of the car and walked around to the passenger side with the bag of groceries in hand. That's when I noticed it. A narrow line in the dirt. I wouldn't call it a driveway. It looked more like a path someone had hacked into the woods. with a shovel. Barely wide enough to walk down, let alone drive through. I stood there, bag in one hand, rain finally starting to fall, and I felt my whole body go cold. That light I saw earlier blinked again. Just once. Same spot. Deep in the trees. It was like whoever was holding it wanted me to know they were still there. But they weren't coming to me. They were waiting. I wanted to call the guy back, but something inside me said, don't. Just leave the food and go. So that's what I did. I gently set the bag on the side of the road, next to the dirt path, and turned to head back to my car. Then I heard it. Leaves rustling, not from the wind. From movement. Something or someone was in the woods. Close. Too close. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran to my car, slammed the door, locked it, and peeled out of there. Rain started coming down hard, like the sky had finally given up holding it in. Thunder cracked so loud it made my window shake. I didn't stop until I was back at the grocery store. When I walked in, soaking wet, Maria looked at me and said, "You look like you saw a ghost." I didn't say much, just handed her the receipt and went home. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't stop thinking about that flickering light in the woods, about the man on the phone who said I was in the right place, and how he never came to get the food. Why was he just standing out there? Why did the path look like it had been made by hand? Why hang up so suddenly? The scariest part is I'll never know. I looked up the address later. There's nothing listed there, no house, no property. Just blank land according to every map and real estate site I could find. Whatever was out there that night, it wasn't normal. I've told this story a few times over the years. Most people think it was just a mix-up or maybe a prank. But deep down, I know better. Something was waiting for me in those woods. And if I'd walked down that path, I don't think I would have come back. So yeah, that was the last delivery I ever did. After that night, I stuck to stocking shelves and cleaning aisles. I don't care how big the tip is. It's not worth walking into the dark when something's watching you from the trees. If you ever find yourself out on a road like that in the middle of a storm, and your GPS tells you your destination is on the right but there's nothing there, just turn around. Trust me, don't wait for the light to blink again.